for Advent season this year, we're doing kind of a traditional Advent season thing, and this week we'll reflect about faith, next week hope, and then joy, and then love. But rather than use kind of readings as often as used during the Advent season, what we've asked, I told you last week that Justin had been working with some folks, and just asking them to reflect on each one of these things and the Christmas season. And so each week you will hear somebody come up and just give some reflections on the topic at hand and light one of the Advent candles. And this week Kevin Cole is coming up to share. So Kevin, if you want to grab one of those mics and let Justin know which one it is. And
That's better. So, good morning, everybody. As I write this, you got to put yourself in the context here. So, when I write this, I've had about 36 hours to think about it. Yes, Justin did ask me, but not until Thursday about noon. And of that 36 hours, 24 of them were spent trying to convince Brenda that she should do it. So last night when I had Justin read through it just to make sure, because his instructions were to me were, okay, you have two options, which one you're going to do? And I'm like, well, I need a little more information. Well, do you want to sing Mary Do You Know, or do you want to do the talk on Sunday morning? So I said, well, I'll do the talk. What is it supposed to be on? Oh, just Faith in Christmas. That was the instructions. So when I had Justin read through it last night, I said, is this what you're going for? Is this the direction that you wanted this to go? He said, yeah. And I said, well, thank you for giving me 36 hours. He said, oh, don't worry about it, Dad. You weren't my first choice anyway. So as I'm trying to condense my thoughts without really understanding for sure what Justin is looking for, here's my thoughts and my memories. Thinking back to growing up, I now realize how little faith I had in the events of Christmas. About the only faith I had was that if I memorized my piece that Aunt Doris gave me, and I said it loud at Kilmanna on Christmas Eve, there would be presents to unwrap later. I'm not sure if it was the faith that there would be presents, or if it was more faith that there would be punishment if I didn't, that drove me to memorize large amounts of words and actions. My favorites were saying a piece about Christmas puppies. It was almost the welcome speech. Now, this poem about Christmas puppies was like 6 paragraphs long. It was almost the welcome speech, which was usually given to the youngest child in the pageant. The problem was that I got that piece when I was 18. My other favorites were me memorizing John's speech with his encounter with King Agrippa. They had decided that year that was going to be the central theme for the Christmas pageant. So I was John, and Uncle Lloyd was King Agrippa. It was pages long, yet Uncle Lloyd was very encouraging, and we battled our way through it. Of course, his part was to look kingly, while mine was to remember a whole chapter. But we got through it. I came to understand later that even if I did goof up, people still would love me. There was one year when not only did we have a Christmas program at church, but I went to Ridge School, which was a 2-room schoolhouse, and we had a pageant there. But at the Kilmanna pageant, I mixed up my pieces. So when I uttered those still famous words, and yes, I still remember them 50 years later, I got up there and said, I know I'm just a little boy. Oops! And the whole church erupted in laughter. And I erupted in tears. The remarkable thing that was, even with my mistakes, there were still presents for me to unwrap later. When I think back now on the amount of faith that the Jews must have had in the Old Testament, that a Messiah would come to them, what I had seemed so small. For 700 years, like Peggy had mentioned this morning, for 700 years, they held to a faith that a Messiah would come to them. For 700 years, they waited. Now, I tried to go back. I wanted to use a demonstration as to what 700 years would be like. So I went back and looked up what happened 700 years ago. I didn't recognize any of the places. I didn't recognize any of the names. So I figured that wasn't going to work. And that's with Google. I mean, can you imagine what these people did for 700 years with customs and stories and how they maintained that faith through just stories and traditions? To make matters worse, for about 400 of those last years, God did not speak to them through any of the prophets. During those years, they were conquered, destroyed, taken into exile, allowed to rebuild, only to be destroyed, and persecuted again. It's not hard to understand why so few understood what was happening that night. It's not hard to understand why so few understood and why so few still believe today. Faith was lost, but not all the faith. There were still some who clung to that faith. Mary and Joseph had faith in what they were told by the angel in their dreams. They had enough faith to act despite what others thought and through the difficulties that they would have to face by their actions. The shepherds had faith enough to leave their flocks when they were told by the angels, not the angel named Herod, as in Hark the Herald Angels Sing, and to travel to Bethlehem to see them. Wise men who had faith in what they would read would travel for years to deliver gifts to what they only knew as a prophecy. The amount of faith they must have had then to disobey the ruling king and not to return to him. Faith for them, the faith of them, makes what I do seem pretty small. But now I come back to the present. 2,000 years from the time of his birth, and 50 years from the time I was a little boy reciting a piece in church. In a way, I'm still that little boy trying to do my best. I'm still that little boy with a piece to do and a small part in a big play. What I have come to understand is that God will still love me regardless if I say the wrong words or if I forget a line. And he will still have a present for me no matter how I perform. Because of my faith, each year, the presents of Christmas can still be unwrapped again. Okay.
Oops, you're a little boy.
I'm a little boy. It worked this morning? Okay. I feel like I'm at a wedding.
Here, I have a lighter.
Oh, come on.
Hey, Kev. Hey, Kevin. That happens to me all the time. He just comes and I get kind of sick of him, actually. Thanks for sharing, Kevin. Appreciate it greatly. And so this week, the Advent theme of faith, which my brother so admirably shared. And when we look at our own faith, we realize probably how shallow it's been. And I'm grateful for that. And there's lots of different ways to learn faith. I was thinking of this as I was kind of preparing for this, and sometimes we put faith in our wrong things. Okay, and I'm not sure why this story came to me. It's certainly not a spiritual story or a religious story, but I remember, got to be 25 or 26 years ago, in December, probably I think we were just past Christmas, and I was out with a couple of friends of mine, and we were going to go rabbit hunting, and so there was snow on the ground, and it was pretty cold, and so we're walking through this area, and we come to this ditch, and this ditch is frozen, and the two guys who are with said, "Man, I'm not sure that's frozen hard enough." Well, I kind of put my foot on it, and yeah, this feels okay. I think we can go across this. Well, I got halfway across it, and I went through it. It's like I'd put my faith in something that didn't work. And so, for the rest of that day, I was wet from about the waist down, and those guys kept laughing at me. Much as Kevin talked about in a Christmas program when he said the wrong piece in the wrong place. Faith is one of those things that we can learn both positively and negatively. This week, as I reflected upon that and some of those kind of things, I wanted to start out with a question. We've done this the last couple of weeks. Now I'm going to give you a couple of minutes if you want to turn and talk to somebody right around you and do this, okay? I'll give you an opportunity to. Can you name a time in your life where you displayed great faith? I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I want to hear some conversations, Can you display or think of a time in your life where you displayed great faith? You got one, Don? You got a microphone there? Peggy's got one right there, Don. Don's going to share a time about great faith.
Yeah, when I was in the Army, me and two buddies went over a cliff. Went over at 7 o'clock at night. They didn't find us till after midnight. And I didn't get in the hospital till after 2, and I was pinned in from the waist down. And they first took a look at me and they said, "He's going to lose both his feet." I said, "Oh, no, no, no." They said, "Well, if you don't lose them, you'll probably never walk again." Well, you people can see me. I'm walking. I might stumble a little bit, but I'm still walking. Thank you.
Yeah. Putting faith in God. No?
I had great faith when I moved to Rose Island, not knowing anybody, no vehicle, and 2 hours away from everybody I knew. Look where I am.
And God brought people around you. Yeah. Appreciate that. Can you get up and take that to Gloria, and then we'll go to James after that?
I had great faith when I was out in Minnesota exactly a year Tuesday when my grandson had a bone marrow transplant at age 2. And they didn't think he would even make it through the chemo. And he's here today, and we're celebrating on Tuesday his bone marrow transplant day.
Great.
The greatest point in my faith journey was when I met a young lady in the Philippines. I didn't even know where the Philippines was. I did not know any place. Didn't know anything about them. And I traveled gave my apartment up, gave everything that I owned to go to a place in the Philippines in eastern Visayas, Philippines. And I spent 10 years there becoming a missionary, working with young people. And now that faith journey is just that she might be able to come home to be with her family, because it's really tough being separated, and each and every day of our lives, and especially for Stanley, because many nights he'll go to bed crying because his mommy's not with him. So it's a great journey for all of our family. Thank you.
I encourage you later on. It's good to share stories of faith. And when God showed himself faithful. You know, sometimes we think God is, we wonder about, is he faithful? And sometimes it takes years for some of those things to kind of reveal themselves. So what is faith? Okay? Here's a Webster definition of faith. Faith, complete trust or confidence in someone or something. Okay? Faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. You know, for those of you who listen to DC Talk a lot, this was always a line in one of their songs that said, faith is the evidence of things unseen. I don't know where they got that from, but I just knew it as a DC Talk line. And so that's where I often look at it and think of that line from. But one of the things as I began to look at this word faith and begin to look in the scriptures and the Bible dictionary and kind of put some of those things together, I want you to think about this. Faith is action based on a trust that the evidence will follow. Faith is action based on the trust that the evidence will follow. When we step out in faith, we step out not knowing what's going to happen next. But if we're truly in tune with God and the things of the Holy Spirit, we will be willing to step out and say, God, I don't get this in these moments, but I think you have something for me. I think there's something that you want to reveal to me. And so when you really begin to look at this concept of faith, I think without action just isn't, you know? And so I really began to pull that piece together. And one of the things I want to do over the course of these next 4 weeks of Advent season is reflect with you on each of these topics, okay? And so I'm going to start this next slide with a question. In your opinion, so it's your opinion, can you be wrong? I always tell my kids this in youth group when I ask them this. It's your opinion. You can't be wrong, so don't feel like you can't share it because it's your opinion. But in your opinion, who displays the greatest levels of faith in the Old Testament? You know, Peggy talked about the Bible being split and about that time when it already was pointing to a Savior, to a Messiah. And Abraham? What? Daniel, Abraham? You can't be wrong. Noah? What? Job? I heard somebody else say something. Moses? Jeremiah? Okay. I mean, all of these are good answers. And actually, when I was kind of thinking of this, I thought about, okay, who am I going to use? Because that's kind of my goal for this Advent season, is to share somebody from each one of these categories from the Old Testament, and then someone from the New Testament. And I actually reflected on several of those that you just talked about. But I decided to use one that I think her faith displayed itself a little bit differently than we think. And also, the other side of this in the New Testament, you will see that I'm going to talk about Mary and her faith. And so, two women who really, when you look at so much of their stories, are really tied together. Hannah, Samuel's mother, and Mary, the earthly mother of Jesus. If you want to follow along with me, I'm going to read from 1 Samuel. the story of Hannah and these levels of faith that I think we see in her. And you remember the story of Hannah, the second wife of a man, and she was barren, and she was a godly woman. And so I'm going to just pick up in verse 9. It says, "Once, when they had finished eating and drinking at Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. In bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk, and said to her, "How long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine." "Not so, my lord," Hannah replied. "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." Eli answered, "Go in peace, and may the Lord of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." She said, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." Then she went her away and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. So you get this picture of this woman who is greatly troubled, and she's just seeking the Lord and just pouring herself out. I mean, whenever I read this, the imagery that there is just always amazing about that. And obviously this was a woman of great faith, okay? And one of the things that I see here in verse 10, it says, Hannah in faith takes her problem to the Lord. And she's just crying out before him. Now, we could talk a long time about all the other things that must have been going on there in Israel when Eli assumes that she's drunk. But what I want you to see is the faith of Hannah that says, I'm just going before the Lord. I don't know what else to do. I'm going before the Lord. And what's really interesting to me is even though she doesn't see anything, she believes the high priest and what he tells her. And it says that as Hannah had faith in what Eli told her and believed in the unseen. I always love that line that I just read when it says, then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. It's like, here's the high priest. He says it. I'm going to believe it. You know, that fits so well with that idea that faith is action based on trust. And so we see this woman who does that, and then as we continue reading verse 19, it says, early the next morning they rose and worshiped before the Lord, and then they went back to their home in Ramah. Elkanah, her husband, laid with Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, because I asked the Lord for him. When the man Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vow, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, after the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always. Do what seems best to you, Elkanah, her husband told her. Stay here until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord make good his word. So the woman stayed at home and nursed her son until she had weaned him. After she had weaned him, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. When they had slaughtered the bull, they brought the boy to Eli and said to him, as surely as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you, praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I have asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord for his whole life, and he will be given over to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. So you get this picture This lady has sought God for this son who would take away the shame of being childless. She would give her husband a son. And you know, when the time comes to give this child up, it's always a very interesting thing to me, because the truth of the matter is, the nation of Israel knew something about Eli. And they knew about his two sons. And they knew that he wasn't a godly man. In so many ways, I mean, the word of the Lord had left, and we would read that a couple chapters over. It had just left Israel. They weren't hearing the word of the Lord anymore because they were so far away. And yet Hannah, in her promise to God, says, I'm going to take my son and I'm going to turn him over to a place where they're not even following God very well anymore because I made a commitment. That's somebody who has great faith. That's somebody who is just amazing to me. Hannah was faithful to her promise, even when she could look at the high priest house, see the sons of the high priest, and going, they're not following God. But she said again, I made a commitment. And in my faith, I'm going to do exactly what I said I would do. And what we get out of Hannah's actions was that she was willing to be faithful, even when from a society standpoint it might have seemed to be wrong. Because, you know, as I read the story, it would have been real easy for us in our humanness to say, well, God would never want Samuel to go there, because look at all the negative things. Look at all the things that are wrong. And yet, what we see is that in the middle of that, even with everything that was wrong there, Hannah was faithful. Samuel served the Lord his whole life, and God did great things through Samuel. And one of the things, we're not going to take the time to read it today, but I want to make just a quick reference to it. Go sometime this Christmas season and read chapter 2. The first 11 verses or so of chapter 2 from 1 Samuel. It's Hannah's prayer. It's Hannah's prayer as she goes and she gives up her child to this family that is, you know, just so dysfunctional so many ways. And she gives up her child, and it's a prayer of praise because she has been faithful. And I think that's so important. And like I said, as I considered that, it so ties these two women when you really look at it, and with Hannah and Mary. Because if we were to go forward here, again, part of the Christmas story that we've read so often, from Luke chapter 1, beginning in verse 26. In the 6th month, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of God, the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end." "How will this be?" Mary asked the angel, "since I am a virgin?" The angel answered, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even little Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age, and she, who is said to be barren, is in her 6th month. For nothing is impossible with God." "I am the Lord's servant," Mary answered. "May it be to you just as you have said." Then the angel left her. When I look at this, I see Mary's level of faith in a couple of different places. It starts with her encounter with the angel. It starts with the encounter of the angel. You know, we read here in verse 29 that she's greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. You know, for a lot of us, if we're greatly troubled or in fear, we tend to get out of there. And yet, what we see in Mary is this level of, you know what? I know Lord. I know the Lord. I followed God. And this is something very unusual. And so I need to listen. And you know, then when we get down to verse 34, and she's been told she's going to have this son, Mary just asked a simple question. How will this be, Mary asked the angel, since I am a virgin? She doesn't say, that's impossible. I've never been with a man. I've never been anywhere. She wants to know, God, how is this going to work out? I'm not sure I get this. But if you're saying it, it must be true. And we know then after that, we go into the angel's explanation and how God is going to work in that. But I love verse 38. Okay? Mary's faith is confirmed as she declares whose she is. Read those lines. I am the Lord's servant. I'm going to have faith in God because I'm his servant. I don't see how this is going to work. I don't understand how this is going to work. But I am going to have faith that it is going to work because I am the Lord's servant. And then right after that, we see that it says in verse 39, at that time Mary got ready and hurried to a town in the hill country of Judea, where she entered Zachariah's home and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. In a loud voice she exclaimed, Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear. But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. Blessed is she who believed what the Lord had said to her will be accomplished. So she gets this confirmation from Elizabeth. But one of the things that we have to understand about faith is Mary takes immediate action. Remember that definition of faith? Action based on the trust that the evidence will follow. She takes immediate action because she's heard from the angel that your cousin is 6 months pregnant, your cousin who was barren, who couldn't have any. And Mary goes to confirm that. She goes and she leaves immediately, as it says. Well, it doesn't say that. I guess it says, at that time, she got ready and she hurried to the hill country. But what we see in her faith is an immediate action. I'm going to check this out. And what happens out of actions is the promise is confirmed. The promise that this angel made her is confirmed. And what's amazing about all of that is, again, we see this young woman who has so much faith. And I still, as I was reading this, I was just caught by that. I am the Lord's servant. You know, we know if we were to take the time this morning to read Zechariah and what had happened with him earlier in that first chapter, he's struck mute for 9 months because he just didn't believe that it could happen. And yet with Mary, we see a faith that says, I'm the Lord's servant. And I believe it will happen because you've told me that. And one of the things that I think that becomes really important to understand is that this faith journey that Mary is now on, it's going to be lived out all the way to the cross. Okay? Think about that. This is going to be a faith journey that's going to be lived out all the way to the cross. She's going to see her baby boy threatened to be killed as they tried desperately to escape to Egypt. She's going to see this same son probably be made fun of, ridiculed, finally put onto a cross. So this faith journey for Mary that starts at the moment of this angel goes all the way to the cross. And I've asked Justin if he would this morning just to share this Christmas song that we all know well. And so, yeah, I'm going to get out of the way for a minute and then I'll come up and finish.
Mary, did you know that your baby boy would one day walk on water? Mary, did you know that your baby boy would save our sons and daughters? Did you know that your baby boy would come to make you new? This child that you've delivered will soon deliver you. Mary, did you know that your baby boy will give sight to a blind man? Mary, did you know that your baby boy would calm the storm with his hand? Did you know that your baby boy has walked where angels trod? When you kiss your little baby, you kiss the face of God. Mary, did you know? The blind will see, the deaf will hear, the dead will live again. The lame will leap, the dumb will speak, the praises of the Lamb. Mary, did you know that your baby boy is Lord of all creation? Mary, did you know that your baby boy will one day rule the nations? Did you know that your baby boy is heaven's perfect lamb? With the sleeping child you're holding is the great I am.
I always wonder if in those moments, as Mary begins this faith journey that will be tested to the max, what she did know or did understand, and yet she was ready to take action. If you could pull up a PowerPoint again, just get me back to the slide I was on. Here, I'll just advance them from here. We'll go through them all quickly. Oh, no, that's where I wanted to be. You guys got it. Just a series of questions to reflect on. What do you put your faith in? You know, we're guilty of putting our faith in our money, in our resources, in our talents, in our own abilities. It's a question we need to ask ourselves this Christmas season again. Question 2, does your faith need to be tested by putting some action with what you say you believe? Like I said, when you begin to look at this, the definitions to this thing called faith, the biblical one, from when you look at both the Hebrew and the Greek that talk about faith, is action based on the trust that the evidence will follow. You know, we say we have faith, but do we need to be ready to do something and step out to say, I believe, God, this is where you're leading? Or does our faith tend to be, okay, when I see some evidence of that, I'll go? So the challenge is, do you need to put some action to it? And the third question, what would change in your life if you developed a level of faith beyond what you could see? That God is who he said he is. That the things that he promised us will happen. What if you could live a life based on that? What would your life look like? As the